All right, we are finally live because it has been just that kind of day with technology. And I thought I could just copy over what happened last time and it would all work great, but that did not work. Okay, so my name is Marion McNealy and I'm here with some very special guests. We've got Rachel Scott and Jess, sorry, let me back up. So Rachel, Case, and I are part of the Lengberg research team, and we had a great live stream in April, and we had a wonderful time. And sorry, let me just get the right view on my screen. There we go. Anyways, we had a wonderful time back in April, and we really, really loved the live stream, and we had such a great time talking about things afterwards, and we came away with a whole list of questions which we attempted to answer by pre-recorded video, but that really just didn't work. We realized after like 3 tries that we really loved doing the live stream format, so we decided to just do it on the live stream and cover the questions we had specifically about the men's underwear, because after the live stream we realized that we ourselves had some questions. We ourselves had some questions, and then we had some other questions for people such as Jess Finley, who's a historical martial arts expert, and then Rachel Scott, who is a medieval gynecologist, and she deals with research into women's health. And so we invited them onto this live stream to talk about those topics. So I'm going to do a quick recap of things before we start with asking them questions. So just to recap, here is the men's underwear, just in case you haven't seen it. This is the extant underwear from Lengberg, and it's made out of linen. It's been patched several times, and it definitely has seen better days. It's ripped and it's not in the best condition. And so one of the questions that was in the chat that I didn't feel that it was well answered was, how do we know that these were actually worn by men? And so I wanted to show you some artwork examples of these types of underwear being worn by men, and then what did women wear underneath their gowns? So let's look through some of those. Oddly enough, one of the best places to find men's underwear examples is in crucifixion scenes. So crucifixion of Christ. Christ is usually wearing some kind of like wrapped loincloth thing because he's holy. But the thieves on the cross are usually wearing current fashionable men's underwear. And so here we see Lengberg, or the bikini style underwear being worn. Here there's no tie on this side, and there is a tie on this side, which we see in the Lengberg example. These are blue, not white, which would not show, blue would certainly not show the stains as much. And blue underwear seems to be a common example for men to wear along with white. So this is one example. This scene from the men's bath, Durer's men's bath scene, all the men are wearing underwear, and it's that same style of just a strap on one side and then a tie on the other side. The women's bath, though, they are not wearing any underwear at all, but they are wearing cute little bathing caps, so they have their heads covered or in wrapped styles. But they're not really wearing any underwear. So that's an interesting example. And then here we have an example. This is actually a design for Goldsmith. So this would have been like a book of sketches that was published for goldsmiths to look at for figures on decorative objects, plates, goblets, etc. And here she's modestly covering her genital area with the long tail end of her veil. And the gentleman is wearing a pair of men's underwear. This one's a little bit interesting because, please excuse the black square, because she's not wearing anything and it's quite obvious. And they did a great job of showing her femininity. And I didn't really think that YouTube was going to like that very much. So you can look, I'll put the link in the description after the live stream's ended so you can click through to see it. But yes, so there seems to be a consistent theme that women weren't wearing anything under their dresses. Now, one example that has come up is that there are a couple of pieces of artwork where there's a woman appearing to be a woman, a person taking off a dress who's wearing men's underwear. Well, is this an example of cross-dressing? Well, actually, no. There's a story called The History of the Seven Wise Masters, in that the son of the king goes off to school, and then when he comes back, there's a time of telling stories and so forth. And his evil, wicked stepmother wants to do away with him, and there's some intrigue around that. But he tells the king that the stepmother's being unfaithful to him, and that her lover is in her retinue of ladies, and that he should look to the one that she likes the best, because that's who her lover is. And if the king says, oh no, that couldn't possibly be true, and the son says, well, if you don't believe me, take off the dress and see if I'm right. And the king's like, well, no, like it would be completely inappropriate. That would be dishonoring to this woman. Like, how could you possibly suggest this? And the son says, well, if it's actually a woman and she is dishonored, then the dishonor's on me. But if I'm right, then you'll know the truth. And so we see examples like this, where it is obviously a man's body, but he's got a woman's headdress on, or actually it's braids, but they're false braids with a good friends in the back. And he's wearing men's underwear and taking off the dress. So this particular example led me to wonder, like, well, why would a man wear underwear when he didn't need to? Or was this just such a part of being a man to wear the underwear? Now, we do see like examples of this one where they're battling over the pants, and the underwear here laying on the ground is an example, is a men's underwear style, and it's an example of the leadership of the household and stuff like that. But it got me to thinking that perhaps these were more than just a hygiene item, that they were perhaps a supportive item, like a sports cup or a dance belt, that the men were used to wearing them under their hosen, and so they would have felt uncomfortable not wearing them outside of hosen. So that led me to go talk to Jess about her experience. Like, do men in the hemo world wear these under their hosen? I know they're fighting in hosen. What her experience was, and so that's why I went to go talk to Jess. So Jess, if you'd like to unmute, and I will stop sharing my screen and let you share your perspective on things. You probably should introduce yourself a little bit so people know who you are, because I totally skipped over that. After being so flustered with technology today.
Yeah, no problem. Hello, everyone. My name is Jess Finley. I live in Lawrence, Kansas. I've been practicing some form of swordsmanship since '97 and what we think of now as HEMA. It wasn't called that, but studying that since about 2003. But my interest in clothes goes clear because my first foray in festivals, and at that time, a poor young student, and I had some mediocre sewing skills, so I got into the sewing side of things. So I've always maintained a love of both the swords and the clothes, and that can. Um, so yeah, so super curious question about the purpose of men's underwear, and I immediately got hopped up because yes, I too had thought about this. A small part due to some of Marion's work, as we'll get into. But let me go ahead and share my screen to get us started. Oops, well, I'll hit that present button again because I lost it. There we go. So one of the questions is what were men in the Middle Ages underneath fencing clothes or underneath, and there isn't a lot of examples, but there are a couple, so I thought I would start there. So this very popular German theme, the children of the planet, and this particular image of the children of the shows, in this case men, but men engaged in or athletics, as we might think of it. And so these were some of the things that were encouraged and thought of as being good qualities of. So you would have things like throwing heavy rocks, throwing jump, wrestling, fencing, sprint. You know, that pretty much sums up typical lists of activities. Riding and hunting sometimes gets included as a sportive activity, but these tend to list the same types of activity, and they are certainly activities they typically would wear extra support if they're participating in them, especially when we start to think about 16th later, where they're practicing sport rather than just a nightly deed or a nightly that you know, some pull off, you know. So vaulting becomes even a frequently and deliberately as a part of athletics. And so when you consider these long jumps and maybe some extra support is called for. If we're looking at fencing manuals, again, not a lot to go. We do have a couple. So this fine example here is a copy of Talhofer. Sorry about the black. Still, nobody's tucked the museum rescanning it in color, but what we see here is the Lord paired by his squire for a bird there wearing the now familiar underwear. In this case, it's probably blue underwear, considering how it's in the black and white image. Frustratingly, there's up there, we have doublets and everything else, but no hosen. So I wish we knew what type of hosen this gentleman was going to be harness, because we know he was not bare-legged under his. Another famous image, at least for those of us who study the fighting arts, is this picture of a fencer, hawk, feet of a hind, heart of a lion. But here again, we have this man stripped down in his blue briefs that are quite brief. And I'm sure you know the images that they are quite brief. So how to explore the best way I could come up a copy or a sample from Lengberg, and to make a version of this out of a now Marianne, but a medieval tailor book. This is what the pattern looks like. It's a little to figure out how the heck it goes together. I have a theory that I'll show y'all. But my best way to figure out were to make them and put them on my husband and make him give me feedback. So in a moment. So when you're looking crazy the way I'm interpreting it right now is that the victory arms are actually band of the garment. The legs of this victory man actually the piece that would run between stitched together, and then it can come waistband, and a tie can be run waistband, which appears on either end of the shoulders of the man. So once it together in something like creates, at least in a heavy fabric, a pretty dramatic coin purse for the purpose of the male genitalia. So trying these on, my husband reported that it felt, quote, just like a jockstrap. So if that means something to you as a modern person, that was his experience. I have also tried on a pair that was more to my size, which this pattern made up was actually closer to my size than my husband's, and not be comfortable for a woman's body. These are pretty specific that they're for a farmer, so we pretty much know they're for a man. The Lengberg, which we haven't been told what they are for necessarily. But as I said, I have a version of the Lengberg in the Lengberg size and about the end size that it should be, and you'll see not too dramatically far off of one another. But the later and more complex underwear do create more active support, according to my husband, whereas Lengberg felt to him to be, yes, but more like, I really feel like I would want hosen on top of that if I wanted active support. He felt like they were more hygiene than lifting. In either case, he would suggest northward when wearing this. So again, hopefully if that means anything to you, it's hard to talk about these things without feeling embarrassed, but there we go. So from both of them, the sizing seems relatively similar. About all I had to report from that. Not a lot of period evidence for what men were doing back then, but maybe from these finds we can get some conclusions. Stop sharing.
So I was kind of hoping, and I'm hoping your connection stays clear, because we forgot to mention that, like, Jess is having tornado warnings or watches, or there's tornado activity in her vicinity right now. So that's why the connection has been so choppy. But I was hoping, I know, we'll fill in what you were saying on the closed captions on the editing afterwards. But I was hoping you could talk, because, well, we sort of have time, a little bit about, like, I know HEMA fighters right now are wearing modern reproduction hosen to fight in.
Yes.
And are they like just what? Goodness.
Okay, I can guess where you're going. So
like, what are
right.
they wearing underneath that?
Right. So people that are involved in Blossfechten tournaments typically are just modern sporting, athletic, and outside. And that's again for the most part. People that are involved in the armor sides, a medieval kit underneath is kind of required for the armor to work. Again, as far as I know, everyone is modern undergarments because most tournaments are requiring the placement of a
hard cut.
So therefore, yeah, so people are wearing the modern jock strap to support that. I'm glad you mentioned that. The ends version, they just stick a cup in it and feel great. So
okay. Interesting. All right. Well, tell your husband thank you for his contribution to the scientific experiment. And I think more research is needed through some willing experiments. Just because, well, Jess and I have experiments coming up to talk about, to actually do some hose reconstructions using more period methods for patterning, but that is a totally different live stream, and we will talk about that later. All right, so are there any, we have one question about would the underwear also be used to keep the inside of the hose clean too? And yes, I think that's an absolute absolute no-brainer on that one. They definitely served a hygiene function. I
do think it's kind of unavoidable. Give you a thong feeling. I don't know that you can avoid that feeling, especially once you're putting on so have a tendency to be cut, accentuate the bootay. So
yes, yeah, the period hosen is very, very tightly cut in with a very high crotch seam. So you would want something. You would want something, and then. All right. Do we have any other questions about the men's underwear side before we move on to Rachel and Rachel? Any idea why blue? Well, possibly because it was a color that linen could be easily dyed. We know that they had blue linen. It's a color that doesn't come out in the washing very well. Like, it's a stable color on blue. It's cheap to put on and doesn't show the stains. So
yeah, Marion, when you also the possibility of some sort of medicinal or magical purpose, which I'm still looking. I don't know, but I think that's a fascinating a way to go. And I about maybe blue being a color of service garments, because of course towels frequently have blue, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's a great mystery yet to be discovered and solved. All right. Okay. So we will pass it over to Rachel Case and Rachel Scott and let them talk about if these were men's garments, what did women wear them at all? And if not, what did they wear during their menses, that time of the month? So we'll pass it on over to them.
All right.
Ladies.
Okay, so could the underpants have been a period garment? And I really did want these to be something a woman would have worn during her period, especially when I was able to inspect the extant ones and found that they were heavily like patched and almost padded. And I was very excited by that because, hey, evidence of a period garment, right? Until I tried them out. So I've made the underpants in the extant size, and I happen to be a good size for the extant pair. They're actually tiny. And so I experimented with wearing them at Penzic. And I can tell you that managing these underpants in a porta potty with your skirts hiked up over your shoulders, trying to untie something and go pee without losing your underwear in the porta castle it's an experiment in torture almost. So I found that they were pretty impractical for everyday underwear use. And so that got me really thinking, like, I really wanted them to be something that a woman would wear, but I don't think women wore them every day or even during their periods because of their impracticality in managing them. So I was thinking about what might have been used instead. And I was talking to Beatrix Nutz, who is our archaeologist that we are working with. And she found a sumptuary law. And I'm going to share my screen so you can read it. And then I have a fun video to show you. So let me see if I can share my screen. So this is a sumptuary law from the, I can't see my own screen. So let me scroll on my document. This is a sumptuary law for the nuns of the nunnery of Sonnenberg by Bishop Nicholas of Cusanus. And this is a 1453 document, which is appropriate for our time period. It's actually perfect. And our quote is, each and every nun is to be given a Schorkute, which is a frock to wear in church, a frock for the day, a long fur coat, a kursen, which is a fur frock or gown, 2 nightgowns, a scapular, and a scapular is a Christian garment suspended from the shoulders. And there are 2 types. There's the devotional and the monastic type. So just in case you were wondering what a scapular was. So there's a scapular for the day, a scapular for the night, and veils and kerchiefs as they need. And if they have the female sickness, they need linen shirts and linen sheets as long as the sickness lasts. They may have bedclothes according to the rules and customs of the order. And Beatrix thinks that because they specifically mention shirts and sheets as well as bed linens, is that these were used specifically to use during their periods. So I did a little bit of experimental archaeology and I made a goofy video. So please forgive the goofiness. I can't help it. So let's see if I can push play. Here we go. So my thought is that a woman could use any sort of a belt situation. I happen to have this tablet woven belt and I just tied it around my waist in a knot. I'm left-handed, so I tied it on my left side. I did what made sense to me. You could probably use a leather belt, but I figure cotton or some sort of a fabric woven belt is more comfortable. You could even sew a belt out of fabric. And I just took a length of linen that I happen to have. I actually did hem it. And I just folded it into thirds. And tucked it under the front, between the legs. And tucked it under the belt and back. So I've heard this called a clout. So a cloth, a clout. So to keep it in place, this is just me making sense of things. I tucked the end under the belt just so it wouldn't come undone during wear. And I did the same in the back. Now, I didn't practice wearing this for any length of time, really. I just tried it on for the video, but I do want to actually experiment with this this summer to see how practical it is. And moving around in it, it seemed pretty stable. Like it's not going to slip out or fall off. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, pardon me. And then when the garment is soiled and you need a new one, you just take that one out, wash it, and replace with a fresh one. So that's my little experiment. So let me stop share. Hold on. Here we go. And that's it. I think that's all I needed to talk about. So I'm going to pass it over to my friend Rachel Scott, who has really been doing a lot of experiments and work with women's periods. So I'm going to pass it on over.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm so excited to be here to talk to you guys today. And just as you have tossed it over to me, the storms from Kansas has been sent to my home. So if I have any disruption of service, I do apologize to everyone, but fingers crossed. So yes, my name is Rachel Scott, and I am an independent historian in the history of gynecology and women's health, and I spend a lot of time on periods. And I want to give a lot of credit right now to Rachel Case, because your idea of how this would have been worn has a lot of support from a couple places that I have found, both in extant finds and also in documentation. So the first example that I would like to talk about, and I sadly don't have any images, but I'm going to talk about the lack of those as well a bit. So around the same time that these underpants are being worn by a man in a castle in Austria, in Greenland, there was a site in which a woman was found in a grave, and there is evidence that she was wearing something a lot like that. So what they found on her is she was wearing a woolen cord that went around her waist. The knot was still there, and it was a firm knot on one side. Now, these are very small samples. This was not intact by any means, but they did find the knot. They did find evidence of the cord going all the way around the waist, according to where they found the fragments. And then the solid piece that went between her legs was made of a seal skin, and then that was also stuffed. They found some sheep's hair and wool and moss and other type of fibers that appear to be really close to hemp, that are quite raw. They weren't very fine at all. So these are all incredibly small pieces, but it showed evidence taken all as one, that she had a cord around her waist, and then this solid padded piece starts at the front, it goes between her legs, and it's also fastened at the back. Now, at the time, this is being found by an archaeology team that is clearly predominantly male, because we know the history of archaeology. This was not categorized as a textile piece or as a garment. It went with the anatomical samples, and they thought at the time that it might have been for incontinence, which, according to, if they thought that this was an older woman, that could absolutely track. I don't have the age of this particular person who was interred, but it does give us a lot of knowledge about what they may have used to absorb and how it could have been worn. And then if we go a little, maybe 100 years or so in the future, maybe a little more than that, we start to see evidence of exactly what we have just discussed, where you have some kind of a belt. Now we start to see them in other materials, including a cowhide or a leather, and then a clout would be attached or pinned to that belt. And one place where we see this talked about is actually men who wrote dirty poetry and stories to trade back and forth, talking about, for example, a joke from the Earl of Rochester in 1680, who has found this thing that has fallen off of someone, a belt and a clout, and he is holding it up and carrying it around the party, asking whose horse has dropped a girdle. So we know that these are things that they teased about. We also know from this same author, continuing to write, we'll say, a ballad about his conquests and girlfriends, and he was known to really like to frequent the brothels. He also talked about how he would get a little turned off, and in fact, only a boy who didn't have a lot of experience with the ladies would not be turned off, according to him, by seeing his partner's clout, that he asked that his partner wear a sponge in preparation for them having sex, and then also while they were having sex. So I actually brought to show you all, this is an example of a vaginal sponge. You can still get these now. I don't particularly care for them. I have attempted it. I try everything once because I believe strongly in experimental archaeology. And as a person who has a vagina and a uterus, I can test all of these theories, and I do frequently. So I can tell you that I did not personally find this very comfortable, but I found multiple places where within the documentation, especially at the brothels, there was some talk of using a sponge while you had your menses so that you could have sex with the men. And not only would this help so that they are not going to come in contact with any of the menstrual blood, but also it helps to keep you from getting pregnant. And we do see this also used as a contraceptive. So that is certainly one option that we do have a bit of documentation for. I have a few other things I was going to touch on, but I just wanted to pause there and see if we had any questions. And I also want to be mindful of time. So are we good?
We are good on time, Rachel. So
right.
Go ahead and just talk away.
Sure. So in addition to using a sponge, one thing that I did want to address was the pessary, because I have seen pessaries discussed often, especially earlier in the Middle Ages. It looks like a tampon. Certainly this was a tampon. So for anyone who has not seen one described, or maybe seen an image or an illustration of one, a pessary would have herbs that goes within a small cut of usually a linen and sometimes a wool. And then it would kind of be rolled up, and then it would be tied with a string, and that would go inside the vagina. Now, this was used as a way to take herbal medicine. And it's really important that we understand the context there, because if you happen to have your period at a time that you needed to have this kind of a medical treatment, they would actually, oftentimes, these would be made into more of a donut shape, and they would use honey and wax to hold that shape, because it was incredibly important that you had a place where the blood was able to escape. And this goes back to an underlying concept. I'm seeing Marion's face. You did not want to plug up any of your menses, because we think today, we're all going to sit here and think, well, this is blood. It's the lining of the uterus. We're pretty confident of what it is. But in the Middle Ages, in this context, that was not the case. It was, in fact, excrement. And also, it was poisonous. And I will refrain from, that is another conversation for another day. I could talk for an hour about the poisonous nature of all of this extra poop that we have in our systems as women, because it goes back to Galen. We are colder and moister. We don't have the heat. Therefore, we are terrible at being able to digest our foods. We don't have the heat in the liver that we need. So it creates all of this extra excrement that is going to go to the genitals. And because men excel at everything, they are incredible at pooping. And we, as the fairer sex, are not. And we are unable to properly process all of our excrement. Therefore, it is one of the reasons that we have to have a period every month. So taking all of this in context, it's really understandable why you would not want to plug up menstruation. Retention of the menses is also known to cause all kinds of illnesses and diseases in the Middle Ages. So there would be a lot of, not only would it be kind of a taboo, but any good doctor would advise against putting anything inside the vagina to keep it in place. So while we see pessaries that seem to look a lot like what we use now as a tampon, once we understand the context behind that, it becomes really clear that it's not likely, it's not probable that those were used to absorb one's period. I'd also like to address what I'm going to call a rumor that I've seen in articles, I've seen it in books about menstruating in the Middle Ages, and that is the stick that is going to be wrapped in linen or some other rag, and then use that to insert into the vagina. Having already discussed, as we have, that you really probably wouldn't want to plug up your vagina while you were having your period, I always kind of did like the puppy dog head tilt of confusion when I would read this. As someone who has a vagina and has used a tampon, I cannot imagine anything more uncomfortable than, and also like leading to infection, taking a twig and wrapping it and inserting that. And very recently, thanks to the work of Dr. Helen King, who did a thesis on menstruation in ancient Greece, she addressed this in her blog, and I'm so thankful for her. I found this, no joke, yesterday, and I have been trying to find the origin of this idea for years, and it started in a Tampax ad. So I just wanted to put that out there, that it has been attributed to Hippocrates in his corpus that he wrote in the 5th century. Not quite. He does talk about tampons, sort of. It's a loose translation. In his case, a tampon would be used when there was a wound and you needed to plug a wound. It would not be used, didn't have anything to do with menstruating. So I wanted to step up on my teeny tiny soapbox for just a minute and share with you all, because I was very excited that there is not evidence supporting a twig wrapped in rags. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on also comes a little after the time period that we're talking about here, but to kind of bring everything back full circle to Rachel Case's awesome clout demo, which was awesome and spot on. That is, after maybe another 200 years or 300 years, we start to see a lot of conversations about the apron. And if you took essentially what you just wore, but if you were to sew that across the back and then pull it up in the front and do the same thing with kind of a tuck in it or use a pin, that is going to be the apron that you would wear when you needed to absorb your flow. And there's actually, it's a 1733. I'm doing this off of memory, so I apologize if I get this wrong. I believe her name is Malcolm, is her last name. I think her name was Sarah. But there was a court case that this became incredibly well known, I would say, in terms of the documentation that we have for how people absorb their flow. She was charged for murder, and they used her apron and her shift, having shown evidence of blood, against her. And she in all of her glory, and bless her, takes the stand in her own defense, and she says, we're not supposed to talk about this, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. If all of this blood on my apron and on my shift was from the murder, why is it only on the inside clothes and not on the outside clothes? Obviously she says it, much more eloquently than that, but taking all of that, overall, I think a lot of the evidence that we have currently, I would say my top hypothesis for how a clout was worn is exactly what you were able to demonstrate for us today.
Thanks, Rachel. That was awesome. So I was just thinking as you were talking about the apron and about a lot of what's left in the Lengberg finds, really all we have left are cuffs and necklines. There's of the linen garments. There's really not a lot of fabric left in the shirts that are in the finds, or in the what we call the skirted bra. All that's left is the upper part. If all that fabric is still useful, but the rest of the shirt isn't, that sort of, I think that really gives credence to our theory of, using what you have for not just personal hygiene use, but also for cloths around the house. So they were reusing and not letting anything go to waste.
Absolutely.
So somebody asked in the chat earlier, well, do you think they were recycling fabric to make the underwear? Which I was thinking to myself, well, of course, they're going to recycle linen, and which made me want to compare like the thread counts on the underwear with some of the thread counts on the shirts to see if there were any close matches, which is
Yeah.
which is another line of research to go down. But
it is. I noticed that when I've been doing the reconstructions of the shirts, that all of the linens, with very few exceptions, are very similar in their thread counts. They tend to be between about 14 on the 12 to 14 on the sort of low end. And there's another shirt that I'm going to reconstruct that is a lot finer, and that one has 18. Someone asked in the chat about threads per centimeter. Off the top of my head, I cannot remember, because it's so heavily patched. There are so many different thread counts in the original. I cannot remember. I think it's probably something like 14 or 15. But what I was able to find was, I think I said it was 18. I had to go get my little tool so that I could look at my thread counts while Rachel was talking. But yeah, it's a fairly dense hand woven linen. The original is a little less. It's hard to find the right weight.
So Rachel Scott, we've got a question, and the question was, what I'm guessing concerning to the account of the legal case, why a special shirt for your period? How long were they? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So that I can't answer. I haven't seen any sort of documentation about a particular kind or a style of shirt for when you had your flow. But my thought in terms of, when she's talking about not only her apron, which is going to be up against the skin, that's what's really going to do a lot of the absorption, but also her shift, which was on the inside. And she had talked about that it was those two items that were up against her skin. And my thought, and what I'm about to describe is just the world according to Rachel. But when I kind of think this through, when I'm trying to noodle through, when I'm going to wear only a linen clout, I would anticipate throughout the day that I am probably going to bleed onto whatever is against that. Because now if I wear a modern pad, there is a lining that's going to be plastic, whereas we don't have evidence for that. Now, the other side of that is the find that I was talking about in Greenland, in which you do have the seal skin, and I would anticipate that is going to help to wick the moisture and hold it in. which would also track if they were using that for incontinence, because you're probably, I would anticipate you would have a larger amount of moisture of liquid at one time, whereas it might, you know, when you're on your flow, you're going to have it continue throughout the day. So all of that is just to say, I don't see any evidence of any kind of a liner that's going to keep all of the moisture in. So it probably got on some articles of clothing, which, you know what, we've all been there. That happens today. So
the leather, I think, would act as a liquid proof liner. So I think that is a really good hypothesis, you know, good practical solution. It's, yeah. So someone has asked if there is a place where Rachel Scott's research is published. Yes, so Monique, can you please put that in a live chat? Oh, she already did that. Excellent. So she's blogging at the medievalgynecologist.com. Is that correct, Rachel Scott?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. We are just about an hour.
Oh, I see a new question for Rachel
Okay.
Scott. Is it true that in the Middle Ages they believed that menses were punishment from God for Eve's sins, and this belief was reinforced when very devout nuns would not bleed
Due to malnutrition.
Yeah.
I have seen a lot of documentation, especially coming from the monks and the clergy, talking about the evils of menstruating. And absolutely, the more evil, the more the menstruating. However, what I would add a bit of a caveat to that, and that is that heavy flow and also amenorrhea, or not having your period, having it be late, retention of the menses, those were seen as an indication of an illness. So while I do see that there is some oral overtones coming from the church, and that's the capital C church, the Catholic Church at this time, what we see coming out and being written by a lot of the monks, I wouldn't say that that necessarily applies to everyone across the board, because we do see times when you would have a heavy flow, because that is going to indicate some other type of illness.
Hey, I think that's all the questions. All right. We are just about done with this live stream, because I think we've covered all of our topics we're going to cover. Does anyone have any further topics of conversation they want to talk about before we call it done?
No, but thank you. This has been so much fun.
It has been. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm glad the connection has managed to stay good. Yeah, mostly.
Yeah, it's pouring out this window right now.
So thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Jess, for joining us. It was awesome. You brought some perspectives that I have almost no expertise in. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. This was wonderful.
Yeah, it's been a good time. So we are going to just wait for a few minutes, because there's a delay between us on the Zoom and the live stream. So we've got the last call for questions, and we're just waiting. So we'll wait and see. All right. I think that's it. All right. I'm going to stop the live stream right now. And oh goodness. No, that's not it. Where is? Oops, not that. All righty, let's try this now. All right, here's what